Some places in the States dealing with their worst COVID rates in the past week. Situations especially bad in Georgia as the state surpassed 20,000 dead connected to COVID-19. Good evening to you. Georgia went over the total on Friday with 106 that have passed away. Georgia has also confirmed more than 1 million cases of COVID-19 since the pandemic began. News4JAX reporter Marilyn Parker joining us live. Maryland, Georgia hospitals are overwhelmed with COVID patients.
They are. We're told 95% of ICU beds are now occupied. The state has increased their efforts trying to help out these hospitals as much as they can this week as this virus continues to spread. Georgia hospitals flooded with COVID-19 patients. They have the second highest number of hospitalizations in the country. The virus now taking the lives of more than 20,000 people across the state. Currently, 74,245 patients are hospitalized. That's Georgia's highest since the pandemic began. 95% of ICU beds are occupied. The surge started in Georgia last month. Earlier this week, Governor Brian Kemp deployed 180 National Guard soldiers to assist the needs in hospitals. They'll help in emergency rooms, critical care units, and assisting the nurses. The state doesn't release COVID data on the weekends. Friday, they reported 9,119 new cases and 468 hospitalizations. In the last 14 days, Glenn County reports 2,172 cases. Camden County had 572 cases, and Ware County had 348. Governor Kemp reminding the public the best fight against this virus is the vaccine. The vaccination rate in Glenn County is 42% and 32% in Camden County. Currently, 44% of Georgians are fully vaccinated. Some officials in Georgia say they are concerned with the possibility of another surge following Labor Day weekend coming up tonight at 11. A reminder and a warning from the CDC. Reporting live tonight, Marilyn Parker, Channel 4, the local station.
Good morning. Again, welcome to another edition of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. As you see, again, we continue to advocate for your safety and everyone's safety. If you can, get vaccinated. Certainly wear masks and social distance. The NNPA's National Leadership Awards reception is this Thursday, and boy, do we have some special treats for all who register and log in on Thursday, beginning at 3 p.m. Eastern, with a special interview with singer Regina Bell, and that will be followed with another exciting interview with actress Gabrielle Union. The awards reception begins at 7 p.m. Eastern, and you'll hear from our awardees, Olympic champion Allison Felix, Doctors James Hildreth and Ebony Hilton, Congresswoman Cori Bush, and Senators Raphael Warnock and Cory Booker. So a big week for the Black press of America, and we look forward to having all of you tune in at www.virtualnnpa2021.com. Sonya Douglass Horsford is the principal author of Black Education in the Wake of COVID-19 and Systemic Racism, Toward a Theory of Change and Action, a study of how the COVID-19 pandemic and systemic racism have negatively impacted Black education from the perspectives of Black parents, teachers, students, education, and community leaders. Professor Sonya Douglass Horsford, who is a professor of education leadership at Teachers College, Columbia University, will join us this morning. But first, let's bring on the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis Jr. Good morning, Dr. Chavis.
Good morning, Stacey Brown. And on behalf of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Karen Carter Richards, our distinguished chair, publisher of the Forward Times in Houston, Texas, and all of our 230 African-American owned newspapers and media companies across the United States, we welcome everybody to this Monday morning edition of Let It Be Known.
And Dr. Chavis, the headlines this morning. 26 states in the U.S. have fully vaccinated more than half of their population, federal data shows now, but some hospitals are still filling up with COVID-19 patients who did not get their shots. In Colorado, Most of those who are eligible to get vaccinated against COVID-19 have received at least one dose so far, according to Governor Jared Polis. He highlighted the milestone. He says with 75% of Colorado's eligible residents having initiated vaccination, he pointed out that it's an important accomplishment, but it also means that there's 25%, 1 in 4 Coloradoans who are eligible who still need to go out and protect themselves and others. Colorado, by the way, Dr. Chavis, has one of the nation's lowest COVID-19 case rates with 163.6 new cases per 100,000 people over the past week, according to data from the CDC. Vermont, Connecticut, and Massachusetts have fully vaccinated at least 2/3 of their population. The trio are also among the states seeing the lowest rate of new cases per capita over the past week. So, Dr. Chavis, we see the trend: get vaccinated, and the cases go down exponentially.
Absolutely. Get vaccinated and it saves your life, saves the lives of your family members, your coworkers, and saves your own life. And I think, if you look at the states where African Americans are concentrated, unfortunately, in a lot of those states, they have governors that are not supportive of the Biden-Harris administration. And therefore, they lack in any commitment to get people to wear masks, get people to be vaccinated. They're not taking the virus seriously. And it's unfortunate that African Americans and other communities of color are still disproportionately dying from COVID-19, dying from the Delta variant of COVID-19 and other variants that are out there. And that's why we continue to lead our programs every morning with an update from the CDC and from what's going on the ground. And we hope people will take it seriously. And if you are vaccinated and if you're protecting, doing everything, make sure you tell somebody else. Because in the Black community, we still have too much hesitation, Stacey. And this is going to be a crisis as we get ready to go into the winter months, the flu season. I'm afraid it's just going to be a terrible impact, a deadly impact in Black America if we don't change our attitude, if we don't change our ways, if we don't change we need to embrace the science. We need to embrace the guidelines from the CDC, and we need to protect and save our communities.
Yeah. And Dr. Chavis, the U.S. Capitol Police said over the weekend that it has recommended disciplinary action in 6 cases after internal review of officer behavior stemming from the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. The department's Office of Professional Responsibility opened 38 internal investigations and was able to identify 26 of the officers involved, the police said. It said in 20 of the cases, they didn't find wrongdoing. However, violations were sustained and disciplinary action was recommended for 6 of the cases, including 3 for conduct unbecoming an officer and 1 for failure to comply with directions and 1 for improper remarks and 1 for improper dissemination of information. So it seems really serious that law enforcement actually played a role in the January 6th insurrection.
Well, we know that some of the people that were actually arrested were current and former law enforcement, were current or former military. This is the extent to which systemic racism, this is the extent to which white supremacy is in law enforcement. And so it's not shocking that even the U.S. Capitol Police would have some in their ranks who, rather than defend the Capitol, helped to facilitate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol.
Yeah, and Dr. Chavis, on another note, on September 30th, 2005, 14-year-old Shaquanda Cotton attempted to enter a school building to take a prescribed medication before classes began. An encounter with a teacher's aide on her way to the nurse's office that morning led to her arrest, and months later, the teenager was sentenced to Lamar County Court or Lamar County Jail, where she served 6 years in jail for pushing a school official. The same judge who sentenced her to 6 years earlier that day, Dr. Chavis, had a situation where he had a white defendant about the same age who had a history of violence gave that person probation. Miss Cotton had no history of violence. She simply wanted to take her medication and receive 6 years. Now, Shaquanda Cotton is writing about it. She has a new book that is out now that everyone can pick up. It's called The Memoir of a Teacher Slapping, and we'll leave it at that. A Memoir of a Teacher Slapping. Shaquanda Cotton is a full account of what really happened there. And she said it's a real step toward healing for not only me, but others who have experienced injustice and trauma that made them feel voiceless. Again, the book is on sale. You can get it through Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, and other online retailers. What a story.
That's a great story, and I think it's something we need to follow up. I hope that judge is no longer on the bench. If that judge is still on the bench, we need to find ways to make sure that that judge is sanctioned. There should be replications. When we find these instances of gross racial injustice, it definitely needs to be not only lifted up, but responded to, because judges like that, we need to challenge those judges, Stacey, and not let them get away with these racist sentencing of persons of color, in this case, a young sister.
Absolutely. And Dr. Chavez, want to say good morning to everyone watching on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and whatever platform you choose to watch us. Let it be known, this morning, we welcome our special guest, Professor of Education Leadership at Teachers College, Columbia University, Professor Sonya Douglass Horsford. Good morning, Professor Horsford.
Good morning, Stacey. Good morning, Dr. Chavis. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good morning, Professor. Welcome to the Black Press of America.
Thank you so much for having me.
And you, let's get right into it, because you authored Black Education in the Wake of COVID-19 and Systemic Racism. Let's talk about that. Tell us about what you found in your research and writing this, and what still might be the case now.
Well, I'm really excited to be able to talk about the findings from the report, especially given, the introduction to today's show. We are still, as a Black community, really contending with the issues of COVID-19 pandemic, the economic recession, as well as increased incidents of police brutality and racial violence. And so while we started this study in January of this year and completed it this July and released a report this summer, and there was some concerns on my part about the relevance of the report and the findings. It's really, I think, disheartening to see that the report's findings are perhaps more relevant today than they were even when they were published a couple of months ago, because of the lack of a proper response in regards to handling the pandemic, as well as racial violence in the country and in its schools.
Yeah, and obviously the pandemic has worsened the situation, as Dr. Chavez talks about too, with systemic racism. Instead of any compassion, we've seen the opposite, haven't we?
We have, and it's a double-edged sword, because what we found in the study are things that we already knew, right? It was that there was a disproportionate and devastating impact on Black students, families, community members, elders, caregivers, which has a compounding effect on what happens to our children in schools. And so we surveyed 770 Black Americans across the country. We then conducted 19 focus groups in Washington, D.C., New York City, Atlanta, Georgia, Las Vegas, Nevada, and New York, again, to get a sense of how the Black experience plays out differently in different contexts, given the role that governors play, the state legislatures, and local school districts. Despite the variation, we saw that the implications for Black people were negative across the board. And again, the response and the failed response that we're seeing now is something that we must turn our attention to and begin to think about the solutions that we must take to transform our educational system.
And Professor Horsford, when you mentioned, you broke it down, Black parents, teachers, students, education, and community leaders. Let's talk about the teachers. Oftentimes, the teachers are overlooked in what's been going on over the past year and a half or so, especially given the pandemic. But what has been some of their biggest challenges?
Well, I think, for Black teachers in particular, it's been a long struggle in the tradition, in our traditional public school system. Most recently, it's just been not having the support, the leadership that can make decisions to protect students, to protect teachers and educators and the staff in the building, and to make sure that communities and parents remain connected to what's happening in the school. And so what we found is that, like everyone else, teachers are struggling in terms of balancing their own work and home lives, and making sure that they're able to support and protect and advocate for their students, and having the resources that they need to be able to deliver instruction in a remote environment. And also not having any sense of certainty or vision for how their work will be supported going forward. So it's a really challenging time as one who works with and prepares educators to serve as leaders in our system. We certainly need to appreciate our teacher workforce, and take them seriously and begin to think about how we invest both resources and educational support and leadership support during the pandemic and beyond it.
Yeah, Dr. Chavis, I want to bring you into the conversation.
Well, thank you. I want to salute Professor Horsford and her colleagues. It's a very important report. How can the public get a copy of the report? Is there a link? Is there a website? I know a lot of parents, a lot of students, a lot of teachers are watching this morning's program. We want to make sure that they get all the details of the study. But just let me ask you, Professor Horsford, of all of the findings that you found, what was the most startling finding in your recent research on education and the impact of COVID and systemic racism on people of color, particularly African Americans?
I think the most stunning finding was the consistency across the responses, across the cities and communities. Again, given the great variation between communities that have predominantly Black schools, and perhaps a large representation among their education staffs, as well as those in a place like Las Vegas, which is where I'm from, that has a very small African-American population, are still, no matter where you are, our students are not being served well. And so that was stunning to me. But just to kind of quickly review the findings, we found one, that students are just not being protected. Black students are not being protected particularly. So even as we're having discussions around equity and diversity in education, and those have been going on for quite some time, we still do not have a concentrated focus on Black students, on protecting their rights to exist, to be able to learn. Even the example that you shared about Shaquanda Cotton, for example. And so we see this happening and increasing again in the era of Trumpism, and the environment that has allowed it to be okay for children to be treated in really negative and damaging ways, even in the school environment, a place that should be safe and a place that should provide support. So that was one key finding, that parents just did not feel comfortable having their children in school. And that is a sad commentary on the state of education in the United States.
Yes.
The other huge one is mental and health, right? And so we just don't spend enough time, I think, in this country focusing on the things that we can't see. And so we have to consider the impact of the pandemic on our minds, on our spirit, and what that means for learning. You cannot learn effectively if your mind and your spirit are not whole. So we've got to figure out ways that we work together as a community, and to put and to help shape the system in ways that meet the needs, not only of the academic achievement of our students, but also their mind, their spirit, and the whole child, which is what we heard from students, parents, and teachers across the country.
Just quickly, Professor Horsford, the NNPA, we have an alliance, a partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, focusing on these issues. And even after this program, we want to stay in touch with you because we think your report is so timely and so relevant. Education has always been the key to our liberation. Education has always been the key to our progress. And we got to do everything we can to make sure our young people not only have access to education, but get the highest quality education possible, in spite of the context of the pandemic and in spite of the context of systemic racism. We got to continue to press forward and push forward. And that's why your report, and we thank you again, is so relevant and timely today.
Well, I thank you for the opportunity to share it. We certainly will share the link. We want everyone to access the report. Again, it's things that we knew, but we know that it's important to have evidence in order to shape policy and practice. And so that's the first step. And we look forward to rebuilding a system that meets the needs of Black children, no matter where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to just acknowledge James Wright. He says, salute to you, Professor Horsford, and thanks to the service of your husband, Representative Stephen Horsford. You know, I want to go back to, you mentioned mental health. How much has the COVID pandemic impacted that? As you said, this is something, it's one of those invisible things that you don't always see, but we know that it's always historically been something of a taboo subject in the Black community. What have you seen? Has it been less of a taboo? Are more people talking about this? What have you found with mental health?
I found that this has really become the issue in our community, which is encouraging. Even tomorrow, I'm speaking on a panel with one of my mentors who's 100 years old, Dr. Edmund Gordon, who is a professor emeritus at Teachers College, to talk about the mental and health impacts of COVID. And so I think as a community, the younger generations are certainly open to talking more about how they're doing, how they're feeling. The study in many ways was an attempt to just ask the community, how are you right now? How are you doing? And what do you want to see happen? And so I'm really encouraged by those conversations. The Black Education Research Collective has just hired a new postdoctoral fellow on community health and well-being who has a background in clinical psychology. And so we're excited to have her on board to really think about how we begin to identify solutions that we could bring to schools and districts to make sure that the health and counseling needs of both our students and our educators are being met.
Yeah, and that link for the report, it can be found at www.tc.columbia.edu with the /Black Education Research Collective /research. So folks can go there. It's again www.tc.columbia.edu /Black Education Research Collective /research. And go to, to make it even more simple, thank you, Professor Horsford, go to her Twitter at BERC_TC. Again, at BERC_TC. Professor Horsford, I guess I can say Dr. Horsford as well, can I?
Yes, you can say Sonya.
What do you think needs to be done differently? Is this something that has to be done at the government level, or can common citizens impact change?
I think it's both and. I think that we begin with our community and having a clear agenda of what we want and then fighting and advocating for it. And again, this is what I hope the report will serve to do, to serve as a blueprint and an agenda, again, based on decades of scholarship, of scholars who have been committed to doing this work for most of their careers. Many of them sit on the advisory board for Burke. And so we're continuing to advance that legacy and that agenda. And we need to educate ourselves about how the policy process works to become a part of that. School districts have just, many of them are completing the community input process, because remember, we have the largest tranche of federal dollars going into education that has ever been invested into schools as part of the American Rescue Plan. And so we have to be at the table when it comes to determining how those dollars are being allocated. We need to make sure that there's transparency at the local district level, that we're showing up and asking questions and demanding that hopefully the findings in our report or the recommendations that we put forth will be advanced.
Yeah, and
so we have a lot of work to do, but we have a plan.
Well, and it's so great to hear. And certainly we are not going to say Sonya, we're going to say Professor or Doctor, because you earned that. And no one can take that away from you. And certainly the Black press is not going to diminish all your accomplishments. Dr. Chavers, with that said, I'm going to throw it to you for your closing comments with Professor Horsford.
Well, again, that study is so important. And we're not going to highlight it this morning, but on blackpressusa.com. Stacey, I want to follow up with Professor Horsford because I have some other ideas about how to further disseminate the impact of the findings of this important report. So Dr. Horsford, on behalf of the Black press, we thank you once again and You can count on the Black press to continue to lift up the vital importance of education for our young people.
Thank you, Dr. Chavis. It's an honor to be here with you. And I'm so glad you said that. I was hoping you would. Looking forward to working together with you to make change.
And Professor, one more before we let you go. This comes from Norman, our news director. He says, before we went live, and you remember the conversation, you mentioned being a mom. As a mother, what concerns do you have for your own child?
That we're living in chaos. We need to restore some order and balance to society. And that is what motivates me to do the work that I'm doing. We can be pessimistic. We can complain about how terrible things are. We can decide to create the type of world that we want our children to have. So what they're living in now is going to be their history, and it's going to impact them. And so we have to be, I think, good stewards of our resources and time. We've learned a lot, and we have a lot more research and tools at our disposal. And so we're ready to use those to make sure that my daughter, my sons, and all of our children have what they need and can live the types of lives that they deserve.
Yeah, and I'm going to give Bobby Henry, our publisher, distinguished publisher down in Florida at the West Side Gazette, the last word. He says, I'm still reminded of Brown versus the Board of Education when it said, we shall create equality in education with all deliberate speed. And I'm sure, Professor Horsford, you probably have a lot to say about that as well.
I do. We talk a lot about 1954, but not 1955. But maybe that's another conversation for another day.
And we will certainly, the invitation stands. We want to have you back so we can continue this fantastic conversation, very educational conversation. Don't forget to check out the NNPA and the Black Press of America on TikTok at NNPA Black Press. Yep, we on TikTok. And again, make plans now. How about that, right, Professor Horsford? We are on TikTok. We got a young, wonderful Howard University student that manages our TikTok account. She's fabulous. Y'all got to check her out. NNPA Black Press on TikTok. And make plans now to join us for the NNPA Leadership Awards reception, September 16th, this coming Thursday at virtualNNPA2021.com. Olympic champion Allison Felix among the awardees. Of course, Senators Cory Booker and Raphael Warnock, Congresswoman Cori Bush, Doctors James Hildreth and Ebony Hilton. And in fact, we're going to have Dr. Hilton on Let It Be Known tomorrow morning. And also on Thursday for the Leadership Awards. Again, go to virtualNNPA2021.com. Gabrielle Union is going to join us, and you're going to love the conversation we have with her. We're also going to be joined by the great Regina Bell. Let it be known. Remember this: be so solid that they lose all credibility when trying to throw dirt on your name. Have a great day. We will see you tomorrow.